seriously, I'd like to invite you and thank you for inviting me back this evening. It's been a few years here before COVID, and it's wonderful to be back and speak to people in person. I never want to give up the Zoom talk if I can avoid it. For those of you who read two of my previous books, the first one, A Dog Before a Soldier, or The Paymaster, which I don't think I've ever spoken on here because I published that just 2 years ago. This episode has figured in the stories in those books. The reason why I decided to devote an entire book to this relatively unknown battle is that I found the plans for the fort. I don't think anyone ever has. Also, in the little library in Wiscasset, Maine, we found a 9-page letter from a surviving Yankee officer written the day after the battle to his sister. And it was a gold mine, as you can imagine. So this, and also a lot of letters from Confederates who were involved in Yankees at reunions and to their hometown newspapers. So there was enough evidence now to really wrap this all together and dissect the battle. It's never been totally forgotten. You'll read about it in stories about the fighting in Louisiana, but it's never really been focused on very much. Houston, we do not have lunch. Okay. You'll do I have to warn you each time? There's a lot of animations in here.
That's okay.
Okay, well, he said it. Okay, here you go. The story of the Battle of Donaldsonville or Fort Butler begins at Vicksburg. The Confederates, of course, as you all know, are trying very hard to relieve pressure around Vicksburg. General Taylor has been tasked to try and interrupt their supply lines, but has failed. We can click it now.
This seems to be working.
Different one?
Use the arrows.
Yeah. Okay, where am I supposed to be pointing it towards? Does it matter?
Yeah,
It doesn't matter. Okay. All right. Taylor has been rebuffed up around Vicksburg. Failing in those attempts, he decides he's going to take the fight down into Louisiana, which he's advocated for quite some time. He makes a daring attack, a two-pronged attack of Brashear City, which is the largest U.S. garrison meant basically to hold the Texans away from New Orleans. He captures an inordinate number of prisoners who are paroled, of course, and $2 million worth of supplies. His army is now rich with ammunition, with clothing, with leather harness, with artillery, with powder. It's one of the better tricked out Confederate armies in the South at this point. It's going to be a long night. There we go. There we go. He splits his force. Taylor will take no part in the battle, actually. He chooses Alfred Mouton, who is Louisiana's favorite Cajun-born general, and says, I want you to clear the banks and see how close you can get to New Orleans. He has cavalry troopers make it to Boot, which is 20 miles from New Orleans. This is how close the rebels have come to recapturing the city. It is, unfortunate for them, on the opposite bank, and gunboats are patrolling it. But still, he's threatening New Orleans. Mouton, maybe you just need to click like 5 times.
Try something else. Sorry. Technical.
You're all sleeping over, right? Is your fob back there? Okay. No, no joy.
Here, that word's made. Okay.
Okay, so he orders Mouton to go to Donaldsonville and clear the area. Hang on, we just lost ground. That's the same slide. Okay, are you going to be doing it or am I going to be doing it? Okay, all right. Now, the bulk of the Union Army in this area, especially after the loss of Brashear City, is investing Port Hudson. There are 35,000 Yankees up there. Go ahead, please. Brigadier General William Emory has only 400 troops in New Orleans. And in the government's infinite wisdom, they're all Massachusetts soldiers down in the most humid part of the entire United States. Go ahead, click, please. His biggest concern is that there are 1,500 Confederate parolees who are remaining honest and true to their word about, not going back in the Confederate Army. But gee, at 4-to-1 odds, who would complain? Go ahead, please. The Navy is also stretched very thin along the river. Farragut considers it imperative to keep the bulk of his squadron down around New Orleans in case there's a rebellion, in case the parolees rise up. And he's actually said, if this happens, we will level the city. He's taken every gun he can find in the arsenal and put it on supply ships. Anything that floats has a Navy cannon on board it. He can't spare many ships to go up and patrol the river. Go ahead, Liz. In fact, there are only 3 of these 90-day gunboats. Go ahead and click. To a new commander who arrives there really the week before, Melanchthon Woolsey, who's from a famous Navy family, and he's had a lot of combat experience. He says, I don't have anything to tell you what to do. Go ahead and click, please. Be vigilant. Watch for the enemy. They're going to show up somewhere. This is how tenuous the situation is for the Yankees at this point. Go ahead. Oh, you went ahead. Okay, now you're getting into it. All right. Mouton has decided to send Texas Brigadier General Thomas Green up to clear out Donaldsonville. The Confederates are heady with their success, as you would expect after Brashear City. They're just steamrolling Yankee garrisons left and right. A lot of the guys are sickly. They're in dribs and drabs. They're plucking telegraph stations off the face of the map left and right. They're just going to hurry up and grab Donaldsonville and then go take New Orleans. Go ahead and click, please. And again, he's been given 6 regiments of cavalry and a battery of guns. Everyone is mounted. They're moving fast. His men are so tired at one point they're falling asleep in their saddles, but he's moving quickly. He expects to surprise Donaldsonville. He has 1,725 men. Go ahead, please. The fort at Donaldsonville is small and brand new. It's only meant to hold a garrison of 600 men. It was finished in February of 63. It sits at the fork between Bayou La Fourche and the Mississippi. Now, to us Northerners, bayou to me means a crocodile infested swamp. It actually is a navigable river. And this Bayou La Fourche is actually well known in the area because the pirate Jean Lafitte used it to circumvent all the official government agents in New Orleans and find the back way up the Mississippi. At certain times of the year, most times of the year, you can navigate La Fourche all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. So it's a critical point there. Oddly enough, in all these maps now, north is straight up. So the Mississippi is flowing left to right in all these maps. It is surrounded by the levee and the levee has a parapet on the riverside. Go ahead, please. It also is surrounded by a ditch, which will figure mightily in the coming battle. There's one main gate, and click it again, please. And there are 2 stockade gates. Now these defend what's called the batture. We would say beach. It's the low ground between the levee and the river. And there are 2 heavy stockades there of cypress logs with 2 stout gates in each one. These are the weak points of the fort. So click again, please. It is being held right now, not by 600 men, but by the 28th Maine. These guys are a volunteer regiment. They're a 9-month regiment, and they are so close to going home. Click it again, please. They're due to return home in mid-July. This is just right after June, obviously. Click again. They were only ordered there on the 27th of May. They have about a month and a half to go, and they've been taken off garrison duty. Now, there's only one single company of them there, Company G, under Augustin Thompson. The entire rest of the garrison are convalescents. This quote is wonderful. Of those 35,000 men at Port Hudson, half were sick all the time. Click it again, please. A great quote, only from a Yankee. It is a climate fit only for snakes. It could reduce a stout Yankee to half himself inside of 3 weeks. Malaria, just the heat and humidity, just knocks these guys down. They're basically weaklings. There's one reason the rebels have had so much success rolling them up. The guys just can't fight. Go ahead. Now, what Green doesn't know is just how bad the situation is inside the fort. They're stretched incredibly thin. Go ahead, please. The 28th Maine, this is with the one Company G and fragments of every other company. Researching this was challenging because you try to find a company affiliation. Oh, are they all there? No, just 2 guys with a sergeant and 2 privates are there from this company. Every company has convalescent men there. Go ahead. There's also convalescents from New Orleans. You can click 2 more times to go through this. General Emory has graciously gone to the hospitals and said, look, anyone who can fog a mirror wants to, go to Fort Butler. It's a suicide mission, but knock yourself out. And the commander has actually gone to the length of every transport that stops there. He'll go on board and beg any officer returning to Port Hudson or Vicksburg, can you stay here a few days? Something bad's going to happen. Do you have any men that can stay with us? So he's getting dribs and drabs of guys from all over the place. So there's a lot more fellows just from Maine. Go ahead and click, please. This is how they decided who was going to do what in the battle. If you couldn't load a cannonball or hold a musket with a bayonet, you got to pull the lanyard. There are stories during this battle of fellows actually crawling on the ground along the parapet, dragging their musket, loading it, standing up and firing, collapsing again, just to reload and drag it somewhere else. Interestingly, there's also these 10 fellows here. I should have mentioned from the 1st or 3rd Louisiana. I'm sorry, I made you jump the gun. This is something that doesn't appear in any other stories about this battle. And a lot of researchers in the South and Louisiana have turned themselves inside out trying to justify or rationalize how many black soldiers might have been there based on, census records, things like that. Well, we have an eyewitness account that one gunboat that's stationed there, the Princess Royal, 2 days before the battle, the deck officer records at 5 o'clock in the morning, watched a transport come from New Orleans and offload some black troops. I theorized some might be in a platoon or a squad. So there's at least 10 black soldiers there, probably from the 1st or 3rd Louisiana. Nobody ever reads Navy logbooks. It's right there. Bullen, and I apologize, I can't prove this is a picture of Major Bullen. He's the right age. He's unidentified. He's a major from Maine. So I put that in a footnote. He has no combat experience whatsoever. Go ahead and click it, please. Also, he seems to be suffering PTSD. One of his men said this about him, and I did some research on this, and originally we associated that with combat, the after effects of combat. It turns out that, and this fits Bullen, the threat of combat is enough to give you this terrible kind of jitters. And the situation in Louisiana, in this area, he'll send men out on patrol. Those 3 guys won't come back. Telegraph station with five guys patrolling disappears. A body floats down the river, one of his men who's obviously been executed. He's been killed in that style. Men just disappear. He can't tell who's really loyalist and who's secessionist because to his ears, they all talk funny. They all could be Southern secessionists. You just don't know. So he's jumpy as all get out. And this will become evidenced after the fact. Go ahead and advance, please. The men themselves, click one more time, please. They know what's going on. They're willing to put up a good fight, but they really don't expect to succeed. They know how sickly they are, and the Confederates are steamrolling every Yankee station they can find. Go ahead. Brigadier Emery, buoy them up, says, make a good fight. It's about as good as Farragut saying, I don't know what you're supposed to do, just watch for them. Go, you already did, sorry. The temperature at this point is absolutely, utterly miserable. The heat index is 115 degrees, and of course, the suit of the day is thick blue wool. Click one more time, please. Local newspaper said, if only you could take off your flesh just to cool your bones. Another quote said that one newspaper reporter said that I love looking out at the hot square and watching fat men lard themselves across the open space. To remedy this, of course, I didn't say Simon Says. Oddly enough, at this point, as an aside, the frozen water trade has resumed. This is shipping ice from New England down to New Orleans. This started in the 1840s. The Southerners have gotten very used to it. And there's an advertisement right before the battle about an ice cream salon that has opened in New Orleans. And it is safe for women to go there at any time of the day. One wonders what other salons were like without them. Go ahead now. Greene makes his advance in the middle of the night. This is something the Texans have gotten good at, and it's unusual in the Civil War. There are very few nighttime battles. This will be one, but he's also comfortable making his moves at night. Go ahead, please. He spends the early morning sending out scouts, collecting as much information as he can about the fort. That's the right thing to do. Go ahead. Unfortunately, it's all wrong, or he misinterprets it. Go ahead and click, please. For one thing, his men report back there are 5 gunboats. Now, I have the logbooks from the Princess Royal, the one gunboat that's there, and it doesn't mention many transports. I don't know how these guys counted 5, but supposedly there's 5 gunboats there, just the one. He thinks there's 500 Yankees inside. There's half that many, and they're all sick. There might be 30 guys, 40 guys that are fit to be, on active duty. He also thinks the fort, and this is critical, is surrounded by an insurmountable 16-foot ditch. This plays a big role in the battle. It is not surrounded by a ditch like that at all. He sends a note back to his boss, Mouton, saying, look, this is a bad idea. We're going to lose a lot of guys. Why don't we instead cut revetments in the levee, because they've done this before, mask them, camouflage them, and when the gunboats or transports come by, you fire every cannon you've got. And by the time the Navy can react, you're gone again. The Navy hates this because they'll do it again and again and again, and you can't tell where you're going to get ambushed. This is life of a sailor in the Mississippi at this point in time. He says, can we just do this? Mouton says, sure. But his message doesn't get back to the following morning after this nighttime battle. Go ahead and advance, please. Later on, during the day, Greene never actually sees anything about the fort by himself, but he evidently gets a little more information, and he begins to change his mind and comes up with a plan. For one, he finds out there is no ditch on the riverside of the fort. This is true. If you go up over the levee, you're in the fort. That's the easiest way in. You have to get past the stockades, but that's the way in. Charging over that levee will get them inside. Go ahead. He also thinks, and this is terribly tragic, he thinks the fort is garrisoned entirely by black troops. We'll set the stage for this one now. He issues a surrender ultimatum at 4 o'clock. And in that ultimatum, he says, we will not be answerable for the consequences and no prisoners will be taken. Other Texas cavalry regiments in the war will be caught raising the black flag or fighting under the black flag. They don't actually do that here, but this is what Greene's words mean. So why does he say this? Please go ahead. Only a few weeks before, 2 black regiments, go ahead and click once, please. The 1st and 3rd made an attack at Port Hudson. They suffered 75% casualties. Witnesses said there were no prisoners and there were no wounded. Men fired their muskets, broke their muskets, resorted to frontier fighting style, gouging eyes, tearing off ears, choking each other to death. And the Confederates took no prisoners and all the wounded were executed. 75% casualties. It is hard in our somewhat sanitized history books to get across the sheer unbridled hatred Southerners had for Black troops. This battle will illustrate it. Go ahead, please. A few days before the battle, Confederate newspaper sums it up. Blames the North for deploying Black troops. You'll infuriate us. Naturally, what we're about to do, we would never have done at the beginning. Go ahead. And what's more, history will hold us blameless. It's a get out of jail free card for murdering people. That's just 3 days before the battle. Bullen's force is bolstered a little bit by some very motivated men, though. In addition to the people I listed before, go ahead and click, please. He has about 20 freedmen. And click once more. Along the Mississippi, whenever the government liberated a plantation, we needed the cotton. We wanted the cotton. And here was a trained workforce. We hired back all the Black freedmen, paid them to do the same job they had done, but they're getting a place to live, they're getting food, they're getting clothing, all that. And so Pollock from Michigan is in charge of one of the plantations on the west bank of the Mississippi, just south of the fort, I believe. And the reason I believe that is it belonged to an ex-governor of South Carolina, so that was a good one to take over. Just based on the censuses and the slave records and how many Black males there were on that plantation of appropriate age, I guesstimated 20 men. It might have been 40, it might have been 15, there's no way to know. Pollock has secured muskets. He's given them, a couple days worth of training, says we're on the wrong side of the river, we might as well go fight. He brings them into the fort. They're stationed on the western wall, which is on the left of all the maps you'll see, because that's supposedly the safest place. Go ahead and click, please. The defenses on the fort are stretched incredibly thin. Go ahead. Defending the Mississippi stockade is the one healthy company, Augustine Thompson, with 40 men. Go ahead. On the other gate is Edward Neal, whose letter details the battle. He has about 40 men, but only a few fragments from his own regiment, and mostly guys from New Hampshire, the 16th. Go ahead, please. The 53rd Mass, I think, mans the wall that commands the main road in, but it's under another Maine 28th Officer Johnson. He's there without his own men. Go ahead. The Freedmen and the Louisiana 1st and 3rd under Pollock are on the western wall, which is supposedly safe, about 30 men. There are reserve squads scattered around anywhere from 6 to 10 men. It's hard to tell how many or exactly where they were. Bullen probably just moved them where we needed them. And click again, please. And then the 52nd Mass, they're manning the 5 24-pounder guns, which are made to command the different salients. All right, click, please. Bullen sees the writing on the wall, and he goes out to Woolsey about 4:30 and says, this isn't going to work. How's about you take us away? Go ahead and click, please. Woolsey says, when they get us, we'll surrender, not before. Now, Woolsey could have pulled rank. Navy captains are actually the equivalent of an Army major, and he had seniority. Woolsey lets Bullen run the show here, but he actually is in charge of everything. Go ahead, please. The rebel plan is not a bad one, but it relies on too precise timing. The idea is for bulk of the regiments to pin down the Yankees, keep them on their sections of the wall, so 2 other regiments can breach the stockades. Go ahead, please. One will come up through Donaldsonville proper and snipe at them. 3 others. TPR is Texas Partisan Rangers. TMV is Texas Mounted Volunteers. There's only one legitimate Confederate regiment in there. The rest are all basically ex-Texas Rangers. The battery will keep everyone under fire, and while they're keeping everyone pinned down in place, go ahead and click, please. The 2 assault regiments under Shannon and Hardeman will come along the bayou, along the levee, and breach the 2 stockades and meet in the middle. Go ahead, please. Greene comes up with this plan not until 8 o'clock at night, 8:15. Go ahead. And a half hour later, they ride off. He has not communicated the plan in detail to more than 2 of his 5 or 6 company officers, regimental officers. Go ahead. However, the weather conditions should help them. There's a full moon, but on the other hand, it's setting. There's also a low fog, which is a little unusual at this time of year along the Mississippi. Go ahead. As they move into position, though, about, was it 9:02, 9:20, a Navy officer makes it back to his ship. Click once more, please. This is John Stevenson. He's an acting assistant paymaster, and he has pulled off more crazy stunts in the war than you can imagine. The book is called The Paymaster. It's back there next to the lovely saleswoman. Stevenson has gotten permission to do sorts of things like, let me go ashore and pretend I'm a Southerner and I'll find out their plan. Or at one point he went ashore and captured a Confederate officer in the 55th Virginia cavalry. And when he was praised for it, he said, it wasn't as successful as I want. They said, why? I couldn't bring the horses. It's also a bit of a smart aleck. In this case, he doesn't bother telling his commander, Woolsey, that he's going to try something crazy. He dresses as a civilian, flees the fort. Now, when he's done this earlier, the men on board his ship back on the Rappahannock were told, fire wide, it's Stevenson wants to try something. The guards at this fort don't know who he is. They think he's a fleeing secessionist. They're trying to plug him. He manages to get away, and this episode convinces the rebels who are picketed around the fort watching, okay, he's one of us. He tells them what he knows they already know about the ship, how many guns, how many men, stuff like that, and that he's an escapee who'd been taken prisoner as a loyal Southerner in New Orleans. They take him back to camp, and somehow he overhears the entire plan. Now he brings the entire plan back to Woolsey and Bullen at 9:30 at night. Go ahead, please. This is the ace in the hole. At midnight, Shannon, who is one of the two assaulting regiments up here, the 5th TMV, they step off and everything immediately goes awry. The plan is just too precise, too closely timed. Go ahead, please. He's immediately spotted. There are pickets in this suburb of Donaldsonville called Port Barrow, and they immediately light the town up. They're expecting this. The rebels do not want to go beyond the flames because then they're backlit. So it pretty much brings them to a stop. Go ahead, please. They don't want to advance beyond the flames. They'll become silhouetted because they hear the firing and see the picket fires up. Princess Royal under Wolsey begins prowling the bank, just looking for anything that looks like a Texan. Go ahead, please. And what's more, two of the regiments don't show. Lane, who's an ex-Texas Ranger, has a great service record before and after this. For some reason, never leaves camp. He sees everybody else leave camp, but he just stays the whole night in the camp 9 miles out. The other fellow says, I had a guide who would not guide. He will eventually find his way to the battle too late, but right now he's stomping around south of Donaldsonville doing I don't know what. The guide is lucky to survive. In researching this, I found out that the guides, quote unquote, were not usually loyal Southerners. They were impressed and had to lead under duress. If this guy intentionally misled Hardeman long enough so that he didn't play a role in the battle, he was lucky not to get killed because it was obvious to Hardeman, my guide was not guiding. All right, finally, they begin moving up little by little and things still don't go well. As Phillips and Herbert move through the town, as the fires slowly die down, Woolsey runs into trouble along the bayou. Go ahead, please. For one thing, this was a map right after the war, and they'd not done any work on the levee. So this was interesting because there was a quote that said, darkness and ignorance of the ground cause much blundering. And I'm thinking, all you have to do is walk along and say, levee on this side, water on that side, follow the Butler. He runs into a blind canyon where two different constructions of the levee didn't quite match up. So they backed up and made it match up down here. He marches his men into this blind canyon, gets them ready to assault what they think is the fort. The first guy gets to the top and it's like, it's the levee, boss. I'm paraphrasing. Now you have to turn these 350 men around, march them back up, turn them around again and go down the Butler on the correct side of the levee. Water here, levee there. So he loses a lot of time doing that. Go ahead, please. The Princess Royal hears them. The Texans will not shut up. Now, it sounds funny, but this actually plays into the battle. Remember, these guys think this is an all-black garrison. The veteran troops in the fort said, we've heard the rebel yell. This was not it. This was a low, guttural, bestial animal growl. My theory is, no proof one way or the other, I think they're trying to terrify the black troops, who they assume have not seen combat. We're going to come, and there's no quarter, and we're going to kill you all no matter what. I just think they're trying to scare them. Fortunately for the Yankees, they can scream all they want in the fog. It's easy to target them. And Princess Royal does. It begins peppering them now at 1 o'clock in the morning. Go ahead, please. Finally, the fires die down and the main attack can actually begin. Go ahead. As the other groups start to come near the fort, though, and start to pin down the Yankees, go ahead. Axemen cut through the stockade gate along the Mississippi. They've been specially prepared for this. They can fire through loopholes back at the Yankees, back and forth, back and forth. Greene has foreseen the need to chop through. Some of the men go down, but they manage to make a hole in the gate. Now they're going to begin to pour through. Go ahead. As he comes through, though, Shannon is wounded. Some of his men go around the bayou because the water's the stockade because the water's low. Others break through. They push Thompson back to the wall and everything. Shannon is wounded. His second in command, Ragsdale, takes over. Ragsdale has not been told the plan. He assaults the levee because he knows that's what his boss is about to do. Neal realizes he's not under attack, rushes 10 men, and another small group of reinforcements rushes up to help Thompson. Go ahead, please. Ragsdale, again, has no idea. His men are totally confused. His men thought that once we were through the stockade, we were in the fort. And they were told They had overheard, we get in the fort, we wait for somebody else, i.e. the missing Hardiman, to meet us there, and we go home. It's a good day. The men don't know what to do. Their bosses, their lieutenants don't know what to do. Go ahead, please. Phillips, realizing that, okay, I don't know where Lane is, but I'm doing nothing in the middle of the fort here. I need to support Shannon. He shifts out of position and starts peppering what he doesn't know are the only black fighters in the fort at that time. Go ahead. Woolsey continues to fire blindly. Now she can do this simply because, one more click, knowing the plan, Bullen and Woolsey have arranged to have signal fires at the outer corners of the fort. Woolsey can fire as much as he wants outside those bonfires because he won't hit any Yankee. And the Yankees know, don't go beyond the bonfires. So anything he hits is going to be wearing Confederate gray. Go ahead. Ragsdale now killed in the second assault. Now you're down to pretty junior officers here. Go ahead. And they go to shelter behind the Butler, where it drops off a little bit. Woolsey can now see them with his eyes. He doesn't have to listen for them. Go ahead. And we know this because of the last three lines in Woolsey's report. He arms his men who aren't on the gun crews with muskets and pistols and fires at the rebels. The return fire, go ahead, is so thick he actually has his men lay down before someone pulls the lanyard under the gun. Miraculously, I think one sailor was killed and oh yeah, I think only one sailor was killed and 2 wounded. It's incredible. The rebels can't see through the smoke and everything, I guess, but the Yankees know where the bonfires are and can still hear these guys yelling. Okay, now go ahead. Herbert realizes that Hardiman is nowhere to be found. We don't know if he got an order to attack or if he decides on his own, like Phillips, this is only going to work if we hit him from 2 different sides. He decides to go through the gauntlet there under Johnson. I mean, the wall is right above him and they're firing down at them. He runs up against the stockade where Neal has only 30 men. Go ahead, please. Thompson, realizing this, and it's quiet on his front right now, he sends men back down to Neal again. The guys are running around like crazy all night long. Go ahead. Unfortunately, the 7th Texas doesn't have the axes. Hardiman's men have the axes. So they basically stack up against the stockade, packed in so tightly, they can't even do what Shannon had done, fire through the loopholes, but the Yankees can. Edward Neal says he spent the evening walking along, hitting the butts of his men's gun up so they'd point down, because the guys were quite happy to hide behind the logs, just go bang. He wants them shooting rebels, which they start to do. The rebels can't fight back, and they don't want to retreat because then they're exposed again. They're safe up against the wall. Go ahead, please. Princess Royal keeps on hitting Shannon again and again, or Shannon's regiment. The remaining officers who are there decide, we'll try it one more time. They extend the line, hoping to get around the edge of the Yankees. Neal, who's holding his own, sends more men back up. He's down to 20 men now, but Thompson has 60. The officers try and get up there. They can't make it. Go ahead, please. They're repulsed again, and the men fall back yet again under Woolsey's fire. Go ahead. He keeps on firing west of the gate and along the stockade and anywhere the guys will not shut up yelling. Go ahead. And they don't break and run. It's not a cowardly thing. It's just, this is a no-win situation. The Confederates shatter. Some decide it's safer to run along the Butler. Other elements will join the 3rd Texas under Phillips. And this tinges the way or influences the way the battle has been reported ever since. Go ahead, please. The 7th Texas, I said, they're hiding back there at the stockade. Go ahead. Now, a 2nd gunboat that had been stationed a little further north, the Winona, arrives. This was actually the gunboat to which Stevenson had found his way in the wee hours of the night, and its commander had put him on board a transport that got him down at 9:20. And he didn't know Stevenson. He's a new officer, doesn't recognize him. He might just be a lying Southern sympathizer, but he decides, okay, maybe we'll go take a peek. And he's told the plan. So go ahead, please. He knows that whatever attack is coming is now going to come up Bayou Lafourche. Unfortunately for Hardiman, he shows up right on time. He's very, very late, but he shows up just as Winona starts to fire down the bayou. So his men can't get near the gate with their axes or the press of bodies from their sister regiment. They're stuck in the open being hit by Weaver. It's fire Winona. Go ahead, please. Okay. I'm jumping ahead of myself. They decide to fall back. Both the 7th and the 4th decide it's a no-win situation. Let's get out of here. They go back along the Butler, run back past Johnson. Major, who's in command of 2 of the regiments there, he decides that he figures Hardiman, he hears him now, he must be fighting his way in the fort. Things are going to work the way they should. He orders an attack. Go ahead. He tells Phillips, who is totally unprepared, I want you to cross the ditch. Phillips is freaked out by this. He does obey, but under protest. Go ahead. Now, this is the greatest fallacy of the battle. Go ahead, click. Greene and his men believe the ditch is square walled like this. They've been told that it is 12 feet deep and 16 feet wide. And he says in the letter to Mouton, I don't have planks that long. I don't have scaling ladders, which tells me he thinks it's a square-sided ditch. Go ahead, please. This is a small part of the actual plan of Fort Butler, which didn't translate well to PowerPoint. It's about wonderfully detailed, about 3 feet wide, and my redrawing of it. Go ahead and it does have a 16-foot wide floor. Advance. And it's about 12 feet deep below ground level. And the fort wall, the parapet's built above that. Go ahead and click. You've got that last little bit at 21 feet to run up there, a 7.5 degree slope is all. Go ahead. This is the angle of fire that the Yankees have. Guess what the safest spot on the battlefield is? Bottom of that ditch. If you get down there, you're in like Flynn. It's getting out again, it's gonna be the problem. Their job was to stay on the outside firing across the ditch because no one understood you could get across it. Had Greene realized this, he could have taken all his regiments, sent them against one face of the fort and simply overwhelmed it. Because his men, once they get in the ditch, are safe until they get up here to run the last 21 feet. No one knew this ahead of time. Go ahead, please. Phillips now will face the only black fighters, both the freedmen and the 1st and 3rd Louisiana. We know this because of something that Pollock wrote, that they're on this front. Go ahead, please. Undoubtedly relieved at being in the bottom of the ditch. Can't believe their good luck. The Texans do not want to charge up over the face of the fort. They are encouraged. Go ahead, please. They try at the bottom. They stay at the bottom. It's like, look, the thing is lined with bricks. Let's break the bricks loose and just beam the Yankees. It's a great idea until the bricks come back and they find out their keppies are just as effective as the Yankee keppies. So after a couple guys get bashed in the noodle, they decide, let's stop throwing bricks. Phillips leads them up. He actually gets his men to climb after him up the wall. He is killed. I know it's one of Pollock's freedmen because Pollock grabs his sword and the credit and is made a colonel of a regiment and serves in Florida after this. And the sword is quite distinctive because it's one that Phillips took from a Yankee officer in southern Louisiana 2 weeks before, has his name on it. So we're certain of this fact at this place in this time. Go ahead, please. Twice the Confederates, I'm not making this stuff up either because this is dirty pool. Twice the Confederates raise a white flag and wait for the Yankees to come out to accept surrender and take shots at them. And the Yankees, one of the Yankees that recorded this says, yeah, the 3rd time we shot them. So it was against the rules of war, but they're doing it to us and we're not going to fall for that 3 times. Ridley, the second in command, makes a second attempt. He does get up the parapet with a few men who are very reluctant to follow him. He's wounded and captured. He'll spend the rest of the war in prison in New Orleans. The Texans decide to hunker down in the ditch. There's very few officers left. Nobody wants to climb that ditch again or run across the open field. Go ahead and click. And the attack just winds down with the dawn because now the Yankees can see them in plain sight. They are shocked that they lost this battle. They said to the Yankee captors that we had really thought we would just walk right in. No problems, no questions asked. We would just steamroll you. Good. It was a terrible loss, especially incredible number of officers, large percentage of officers. Good. The casualties tell it all. The numbers are a little bit nebulous simply because local freedmen said they had carried away a lot of dead and wounded, and their camp was described as being full of wounded cavalry troopers. But still, that's about 28%. On the northern side, we had 10 dead and 15 wounded, which is absolutely miraculous. Go ahead, please. As they're gathering bodies, guess who rides onto the field? Mouton's courier saying, don't bother with the attack, which is tragic. Go ahead, please. A great many of the prisoners, mostly the 5th Texas along the Mississippi, and an awful lot of officers are brought inside the fort. The Yankees at one point, I think Edward Neal was the one, realized that I have more prisoners than I have men. And Thompson sees this and rushes like 20 guys over, and the rebels are asking questions like, where's the rest of your garrison? They couldn't believe how few guys there were. They're hiding, waiting for your next attack. They're at breakfast, they're getting water, things like that. Go ahead, please. And when they're dispersed to the ship, some of them notice Stevenson, who says, yeah, their language to me was unparliamentary. As in they knew what he had done. Please. The moment the battle ends, and this is an ongoing game or battle of invention and deflection begins. People start to spin the truth or misinterpret the truth. Mouton, who dies later that year and never writes about this, he blamed his courier for failing to get his message through. Well, that's true, but you also ordered the original attack when you shouldn't have. Go ahead, please. Greene, he blames his guides. This is true. Hardeman arrived too late to the battle. If they tried a 2-prong approach, neither Neal nor Thompson could have swapped reinforcements. They might have been overwhelmed if the axemen had cut through both gates. Go ahead. He also faulted local intelligence for the claim that there was no ditch on the northern side. And this is what starts to influenced a lot of writers. When Shannon's Texans merged with Phillips, my theory is they brought word that you can't get in that side. Now, these are all just enlisted troopers. There's very few officers left. And when Shannon is repulsed because of the ditch, word gets back finally to Green, who mixes the two reports. You can't get in that side because there was a ditch. There is absolutely no ditch on the riverbank. The plans show no ditch, and no one mentions a ditch. So that's one of the big myths of the battle. Go ahead, please. Taylor, who's a wealthy import of Louisiana, he married rich. He refuses to blame Mouton. That would be social suicide in Louisiana after the war. Go ahead. He says, well, Green should have known just to disobey the order. That gets you put against the wall, if I remember correctly. And he perpetuates the myth of the ditch along the Mississippi because that's a good excuse for this not working. Go ahead. He adamantly refuses to believe the fort was not manned entirely by Black soldiers. When Ben Butler writes his history of the war and mentions this battle, I have read reliably that in his copy that Taylor crossed out Maine troops and put in Black soldiers. Black, it was all Black garrison. His book is still referenced as gospel to this day, talking about all Black troops and that ditch that wasn't. Go ahead. Now, you asked earlier, Frank, about, why was I doing a talk about a fort? I said it was a Navy punchline. Here we go. Okay. Misplaced credit. This is a typical all-Army affair. As any of you who've read any of my books know, that I do a lot of Navy history, and this theme comes across a lot. Bullen never files an official report. We have one brief one he sent to the AG up in Maine, but he is killed a few days later. I remember I had mentioned the PTSD problem. He's taken to carrying his pistol under his arm, loaded and cocked. And he's even a couple times pointed at people just like he was pointing his index finger, but with a loaded gun. You go do that, go do that. So the guys are a little jumpy around the major, all right? And a reinforcement that comes in gets in a verbal argument with him. And they both misinterpret what the other guys are saying. The new fellow is a veteran soldier, served before the war, during the war. And I guess Bullen says, who are you? He goes, well, I'm a soldier. What are you? Because he's a 9-month guy. And Bullen takes offense at this. And the trooper says, well, don't worry. We're here to take care of you now. You can go back to Maine. And Bullen takes his pistol, and people said, we don't know if he's going to point it at him or shoot him. But the trooper reacted and brought up his musket and drilled Bullen. So Bullen died without filing an official report. Emory's official report briefly mentioned the Navy gunboats as supporting. Supporting is a favorite Army word. Anytime gunboats are involved, they supported us, period. Go ahead. Farragut, he's cool, calm, and collected, but his officers are a little riled that they're not getting any credit for what they did. So he says, go to Emory and, talk to this guy. He does. Go ahead, please. Emory apologizes, but doesn't change the official report. So to this day, all they did was support the 28th Maine. It continues to be mooted, like I said, up to this day in official reports. Go ahead. And of course, the state of Maine. When you read Augustine Thompson's report, God bless him, it was Maine supermen that held them back. Abolitionist zeal fueled their blood and kept them hale and hearty despite malaria and ague and, being reduced to a third of a man in 3 weeks. He mentions the guys from New Hampshire. I will get you trained eventually. He doesn't mention the guys from Massachusetts. He doesn't mention the freedmen and the 1st and 3rd Louisianas or anything. It's all guys from Maine. All right. The newspapermen, however, are rankled by this whole episode. A lot of the guys scurried to get a report onto the first government dispatch boat, which seemed to have been going out the day after the battle. And so they took the official Army line, supported the 28th Maine. And that's what gets to the papers first. Afterwards, when they started digging, 3 or 4 of them sent subsequent reports saying, oh, no. We were in a hurry. Here's what we've learned since then. For one thing, it's entirely due to the Navy. Go ahead. And if it hadn't been for them, the entire garrison would have been taken. Go ahead. And if not, all of our land forces would have been gobbled. And the real killer, every success in this department has been due to the Navy and not the Army. And one of my favorite quotes, this is from 1915 from a Senator John Williams of Mississippi who did not serve in the war, but he challenged his other congressmen of the North. Was it your Army that whipped us? You know it was not. It was your Navy. There you go, Frank. Go ahead, please. So how could this attack possibly fail? I mean, the odds are totally against Bullen and his sickly troopers from Maine and New Hampshire and Massachusetts and poorly trained freedmen. Faulty intelligence is a big thing. Greene did not have accurate information, and what he had was just totally wrong. Hubris and overconfidence, that's a big thing right there. They thought they would just walk in uncontested. Failure to communicate the plan. I have no idea why he didn't take the time to make sure everyone knew the plan. He wanted to get in there and capture the fort before the sun came up because he believes, again, there's 5 gunboats waiting. If they're not at least in the fort and hiding, or had been in the fort and captured everyone, so it's negated and run away, the gunboats will shell them out. They know this. So there's a reason to get in there quickly, but you need to communicate the plan. Nonetheless, it's 1,725 men against what, 239? That's better than 7-to-1 odds. Well, the reason they lost was, go ahead, Stevenson was a big reason. Two for Frank, and also the men from Maine, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. Now, Augustin's men, of course, fought them hand to hand, but the men that threw the rebels off the parapet, go ahead, were the freedmen and the Louisianans. So this was an entirely mixed bag of fighters on the Yankee side. And that is the Battle of Fort Butler.